Huffington Post has a fascinating article on the attitude of Americans toward Arabs and Muslims that they released today, and it's pretty much what you think it is. Quote, according to a poll released Tuesday by the Arab American Institute, conducted by Zogby Analytics, found that 42% of Americans believe law enforcement is justified in using profiling tactics against Muslim Americans and Arab Americans. The poll found favorability toward Arab Americans at 36%, down from 43% in 2010. Now, they go on to explain that that's likely due to the fact that there's some stuff in the media about the war in Syria, and there's some stuff in the media about Iraq and ISIS in Iraq, and a whole bunch of, unrest in the Middle East, to say the least. But, of course, the insanely silly aspect of that is, are Americans really stupid enough to not make a distinction between Arabs or Muslims in the Middle East that might be going through certain conflicts right now and Arab Americans or Muslim Americans? You don't see a distinction there. That's unbelievable to me that they don't see a distinction. They continue, quote, for Muslim Americans, favorability was just 27% compared with 36% in 2010. Democrats gave Arab Americans a 30% unfavorable rating, and Muslim Americans a 33% unfavorable rating. Isn't that interesting? Even the Democrats in the U.S., 30% unfavorable rating, 33% unfavorable rating for Muslims. Now, Republicans, unsurprisingly, were even worse. They gave Arab Americans a 54% unfavorable rating and Muslim Americans a 63% unfavorable rating. Now, understand something. This has real-world consequences. Post 9/11, I remember reading an article about this recently. It was stunning how over the top the numbers were. But hate crimes against not only Arab Americans and Muslim Americans after 9/11, it skyrocketed, but not just them. Pretty much anybody that an idiot, deep conservative Republican in Mississippi could perceive as just being part of this group that's separate from them, right? They would go after them. So hate crimes went up in terms of Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, Hindu Americans, Buddhist Americans, Sikhs. I mean, just anybody, I don't know, you have darker skin than me. Attack! Shot up tremendously after 9/11, and it continued for a really long time. And that's the real-world reflection of this unfavorable rating that they're getting. Now, again, this is fascinating to me because these numbers are related to Americans' perception about terrorism, their perception of terrorism, and who's perpetrating it, and which groups are more dangerous as a result of that. But, as we've discussed time and time again, the reality is that when it comes to the United States of America, domestically in the United States of America, 56% of the terrorist attacks from the 1990s until around today have been perpetrated by right-wing terrorists, anti-government militia groups, or fundamentalist Christian terrorists. So whether it's, KKK lynchings we're talking about, or whether it's abortion clinic bombings, which happens fairly regularly in the United States, or whether it's sovereign citizens, storming the Georgia courthouse as they did recently and going with weapons and bombs and whatnot, or, the guy who put the "Don't Tread on Me" flag over a Las Vegas cop when he shot him in the head at a pizza restaurant, as happened recently, or whether it's the anti-Semitic terrorist who thought he was going in a Jewish center and killing Jews and even ended up killing Jews, but whether it's anti-Semitic attacks, and that's, of course, terrorism too. So right-wing terrorists, objectively speaking, they do most of the terrorism in the U.S., but the perception is, well, no, we want to blame Muslims and Arabs and, them for terrorism, not right-wingers, even though, again, objectively, it's the right-wingers who do more of the terrorism. Now, let's stop and think about this idea of profiling for a second. Imagine we flipped it. Imagine if we use the ideology that conservatives use and a lot of Americans use against the right-wingers. What would we do? Well, we would have to stereotype old white men, especially old white men in southern states, right? Every time we look at them, oh, that might be a terrorist. That might be a sovereign citizen. Oh, that might be a KKK operative. Oh, man, we should probably discriminate against them. We have an unfavorable rating of you. Oh, my God, we see what you really are. We're stereotyping you. Now, if there was stereotyping going on of white men in this country, how would that go over? People will call you an idiot. If you were to go on, cable news and say, well, I think we should stereotype white men. Look, they're the ones that are doing the terrorism. The study shows it, right? That was Department of Homeland Security, by the way. 56% of the attacks. Never mind the fact that the overwhelming majority of mass shootings done by white males. So if white males were, if we actually went by the numbers, hey, these are the people doing most of the violence in the country, we would overwhelmingly look at white men. But if you talk about stereotyping then, oh my God, you're a loony, you're crazy. Because here's the way that, racism works, Islamophobia works, tribalism works. What you do is you look at white people, they're all individuals, right? Oh, it's one crazy person, a lone nut. But if it's a Muslim who does something, it's attached to this global scheme, and they're looking to establish a caliphate all around the world, and they're infiltrating the U.S. government, and they're connected to the Muslim Brotherhood or to Hamas or to the Taliban or to ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Hezbollah or whoever. They just try to attach it, blame all Muslims or Arabs for the actions of one. But if a white dude does it, no, you never blame other white people for the actions of one. That's the way this works, right? And by the way, that's what white privilege is. When people talk about white privilege, that's what they're talking about, right? And this is just another example of it right here. And the final thing I'll say here to leave you with on this topic and in this story, quote, Gallup found that 78% of U.S. Muslims believe violence which kills civilians is never justified, whereas just 38% of Protestant Christians and 39% of Catholics agreed with that sentiment. And in case you're wondering, atheists were number 2. Atheists and agnostics, 56% of atheists and agnostics said violence against civilians is never justified. I'm mad that our group is not 100%. Because, of course, violence against civilians is never justified. What a stupid belief for anybody to say it's justified sometimes. But did you notice what that poll says? In the United States of America, okay, Muslim Americans are the number 1 group to denounce violence against civilians in all cases. In all cases. They are objectively the most peaceful group in the United States of America. See, this is the point, man. Look, don't get me wrong. If you look at international polling on the attitudes of Muslims, right, there's no doubt there's a lot of deep problems in that community. Why? Because they're still caught up in this extremely fundamentalist ideology in a lot of majority Muslim countries. There's no doubt about that. So we do need to address that and change that problem. And look, it's certainly true that internationally one can make the argument that Muslim terrorism is a gigantic problem. But in terms of domestically in the United States, right, and in terms of Muslim Americans, you have to understand it's a fact that Muslim Americans and Arab Americans are just as Americanized as all Americans, and in some cases, even more Americanized than other Americans, and they're more secular-minded, and they denounce violence more than other groups do, and they're not the problem here at home.